What would you do if the person you loved said, "I'm not in love with you anymore," but still wanted you to stay and pay for everything? You know, sometimes life doesn't just fall apart all at once. Sometimes it unravels slowly, like a thread being pulled from a sweater. And before you know it, everything you thought was warm and whole is just gone. My name's Jake. I'm 28. And for 3 years, I thought I was building a life with someone I truly loved. Her name is Belinda. She's 26. When we first met, she was this independent, magnetic kind of woman. She had her own apartment, paid her own bills, made her own plans. She didn't lean on anyone, and honestly, that was what drew me in. She seemed like she had her life together. And I admired that about her. We started dating, and after a while, things got serious. About 18 months ago, she lost her job at a marketing firm, and I suggested she move in with me. It made sense. She'd save money, and I'd get to spend more time with her. I work as a software engineer at a downtown tech company. My paycheck was more than enough to keep us comfortable, so I told her not to stress. I thought I was just helping her through a rough patch. At first, she chipped in for rent and bills using her savings. But when COVID hit, her freelance graphic design work started drying up. It wasn't steady enough to rely on. So, I covered everything: rent, utilities, groceries, car insurance for both our cars, even her phone bill. I added her to my family plan because it was cheaper, and honestly, it just seemed like the logical thing to do. And it wasn't just money. I took care of the apartment. When something broke, I fixed it. I cleaned more, cooked more, managed our social calendar. When we went out with friends, I picked up the tab. Vacations, I paid for flights, hotels, meals, everything. At first, Belinda seemed grateful. She'd thank me, and promise she'd get back on her feet. But slowly, that gratitude faded. What I thought was temporary started feeling permanent. She stopped talking about plans to contribute again. It was like she got comfortable with me carrying all the weight. She started asking me to make dinner reservations not for us, but for her and her friends. If her car was acting up, she expected me to drive her places. She'd make plans without even asking me, assuming I'd handle the logistics and the bill. And for a long time, I went along with it. Because I loved her. Because I thought relationships were about being there for each other. From the outside, we looked solid. We were still intimate, still cuddled up watching TV, still exchanging "I love yous." Our friends thought we were a great couple. We even talked about moving into a bigger place, maybe even getting a dog. But then, one ordinary night, everything shifted. We were on the couch, watching some reality show about home renovations. I leaned in to kiss her goodnight before heading to bed, but she pulled back. She muted the TV, turned to me with this serious look, and said she needed to tell me something important. She said she wasn't in love with me anymore. Not just recently, but for months. Maybe longer. She said she cared about me, liked living with me, but the romantic love was gone. She wanted to be honest because she respected me too much to lie. I asked what that meant for us. What about our relationship, our living situation? She said she hoped we could just keep living together as friends, as roommates. Because, in her words, we work well together. I went to bed that night with my mind spinning. 20 minutes later, my phone started buzzing. Belinda was in a group chat with her 3 closest friends. She'd left her tablet on the couch, and since we'd used it before for texting, I could see the messages as they came in. She told them everything. How she'd been honest with me. How she wasn't in love anymore. And her friends praised her. They said she was brave, mature, that it showed she cared about me. But as I read those messages, something clicked. This wasn't bravery. This wasn't honesty. This was strategy. She had figured out how to keep all the benefits of being with me: financial security, companionship, comfort, without the responsibility of actually loving me back. The next morning, I told her I was okay with being roommates. She hugged me, relieved. She said this was going to be better for both of us. But in that moment, I made a quiet decision. I was going to be exactly what she asked for. A roommate. Nothing more. So, I stopped making coffee for her in the mornings. I used to brew a full pot, leave her favorite mug next to it. Now, just 1 cup in my travel mug. And I'd take it with me to work. I stopped doing her laundry. For years, I'd throw her clothes in with mine. Not anymore. I washed my stuff, and only mine. When I went grocery shopping, I bought only what I needed. No more expensive granola, no more yogurt she loved. Just my food. When she asked me to book a dinner reservation for her and her girlfriends, I told her I was busy. Suggested she call the restaurant herself. When her car started making that awful grinding noise, she dropped hints while I was on my laptop. I told her it sounded frustrating and suggested she check Yelp reviews for a good mechanic. I kept it polite but distant. The way you'd treat a roommate. And I could see the frustration building in her. Dishes piling up in the sink because she expected me to wash them. Sad music playing in the background when I walked by. Loud sighs, like she was waiting for me to notice. She even asked if I wanted to watch a movie one night. I told her I had plans at the gym. Her phone got shut off one day because I'd removed my card from the family plan. She panicked. I calmly explained that since we weren't really family anymore, it made sense for her to get her own plan. I even offered to help her set one up. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was just being logical. She said she wanted to be roommates, so that's exactly what I became. What she didn't know was that our lease was up in 2 months. And I wasn't planning to renew it. I'd already started looking at one-bedroom apartments closer to my office, and while she played sad songs in the living room, I was quietly mapping my exit. Because here's the truth. When someone tells you they don't love you anymore, believe them. And when they try to keep you around as a safety net, as their plan B, don't let them. I wasn't going to be her plan B. Not anymore. After that night on the couch, something in me shifted. It was like I finally saw Belinda for who she had become. Not the independent woman I fell for, but someone who wanted the perks of a relationship without the commitment, without the love. And I wasn't angry. That might surprise you. I wasn't bitter, or screaming, or trying to make her feel guilty. No. I just adjusted. Quietly. I gave her exactly what she asked for. Nothing more, nothing less. And at first, she didn't notice. But oh, trust me, she noticed soon enough. Let me tell you about her birthday. Belinda turned 27 a few weeks after that big conversation. Normally, I would have gone all out. 2 years ago, I surprised her with a Napa Valley weekend getaway. The year after that, I organized a fancy dinner party with all her friends at her favorite Italian restaurant. I would spend weeks planning, coordinating, making sure she felt celebrated. This year, I said happy birthday in the morning, asked if she had any fun plans, and then, nothing. No gifts, no big gestures, no reservations. She stared at me like I was speaking another language. She said she thought we'd do something together. I told her that sounded nice and asked what she had in mind. Her silence said it all. She hadn't planned anything. She assumed I would handle it like always. I reminded her that boyfriends usually take on that role, but roommates? Not so much. If she wanted to celebrate, she should do it with her actual friends. So, she spent most of that day frantically texting people, trying to throw something together. But it was a Tuesday. People were busy. No one could drop everything last minute. She ended up eating Chinese takeout alone, watching Netflix on her birthday. That was the first time I saw her mask crack. The financial reality started creeping in too. See, while I was paying for everything, Belinda lived a pretty cushioned life. She didn't have to worry about phone bills, insurance, car registrations. I handled it all. But when I pulled my card off the accounts, she got hit with one surprise after another. Her car registration expired. She didn't even notice until she got pulled over and slapped with a $250 ticket. Then she realized she had to pay late fees too. She called me in a panic, and I calmly told her that's what happens when you don't stay on top of paperwork. Insurance renewal came up. I took her off my policy. Suddenly, her rate tripled without my family discount. She was furious. But I told her again, roommates don't share insurance policies, and groceries? That one hit her hard. She started living off cheap pasta and canned soup, while I continued buying my fresh veggies. Organic stuff. The good cuts of meat. I kept my food neatly on my own shelf. She asked one night if she could borrow some because she was low on groceries. I told her she could help herself to condiments, salt, pepper. But the rest was mine. She then asked if I could spot her some cash until her freelance check came in. I refused. I told her lending money between roommates gets awkward real fast. She should ask her friends or pick up extra work. That conversation did not go over well. The thing is, I wasn't being cruel. I was showing her the difference between a partner and a roommate. She wanted to strip the love away but keep the support. And life doesn't work like that. Socially, things shifted too. Her friends stopped coming over as much. When they did, it was weird. They'd whisper. Give me these strange looks. Like they were trying to figure out what was happening between us. One night, 2 of her closest friends, Patty and Amanda, came over. I said hi, then went into my office. I could hear them talking low in the living room. When they left, Patty came to my door. She asked if we could talk. She told me Belinda was struggling, that maybe we could work things out. She said maybe Belinda had been confused, scared of commitment, and she still cared about me. I told Patty that I respected her concern, but Belinda had been crystal clear. She said she wasn't in love with me. I was respecting that. Patty looked frustrated. Said sometimes people say things they don't mean. I asked her flat out, do you think Belinda was lying when she said she wasn't in love with me? Patty had no answer. That's when it hit me. Belinda's friends were trying to fix something that Belinda herself didn't even want to fix. Meanwhile, I started going out more. I joined a hiking group on weekends. I got consistent at the gym. I signed up for a Thursday night cooking class, stuff I always wanted to do but never had time for when I was busy carrying the weight of our relationship. And Belinda? She was home more, by herself. The girl who once had plans every night of the week suddenly wasn't going out. Maybe she couldn't afford it anymore. Maybe her friends weren't as available. Or maybe, she was realizing how much of her social life was built on the fact that I planned and paid for everything. But the biggest shift came when the lease renewal showed up in the mail. I left the envelope on the counter, plain as day. When Belinda found it, she asked if we were renewing. I told her I had already signed a lease on a new one-bedroom closer to work. She froze. Then she exploded. She accused me of abandoning her, of leaving her with no way to afford the rent. She said I was being cruel, punishing her for being honest. I stayed calm. I reminded her that roommates don't usually make long-term lease decisions together, unless they've discussed it. She had 6 weeks to bring it up, but never asked. She said I knew she couldn't afford it alone. I pointed out that wasn't my responsibility. She demanded to know why I was doing this. And that's when I said it. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm just respecting what you told me. You said you weren't in love with me anymore. I believe you. And I'm acting accordingly. She cried. She stormed out. She went silent for 3 days, locked away in her room, making phone calls I could hear through the walls. Parents, friends, anyone who might bail her out of the mess. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt light. Like I wasn't the one carrying everything anymore. Because here's the truth. When someone shows you who they are, when they tell you what they want, the kindest thing you can do for them and for yourself is to believe them and act accordingly. It didn't take long for Belinda's silence to break. 3 weeks after the lease conversation, she tried a new approach. One night, she came home from drinks with her friends. She was wearing one of my old college t-shirts, the kind she used to sleep in when we were still together. She sat down on the edge of the bed while I was reading. And then she started crying. She said she missed me. Missed us. She said she'd made a mistake, that she wanted to go back to the way things used to be. Now, a part of me, maybe the old version of me, might have melted hearing that. But not anymore. I put my book down, looked at her, and asked, "What exactly do you miss?" She said she missed feeling close, missed having someone who cared about her. And I told her the truth. I wasn't qualified to help her through those feelings. What she was describing wasn't love. It was loneliness. And loneliness doesn't get fixed by crawling back to someone you discarded. I suggested therapy. Affordable counseling options. Apps she could use. I wasn't trying to be sarcastic. I was serious. If she was struggling, a professional would be better suited to help than me. The way she looked at me, you would have thought I slapped her. She asked if I was really recommending therapy instead of talking about us. I said I wasn't qualified to help her navigate feelings she didn't even want to acknowledge 6 weeks ago. She left the room without another word. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened, but I could tell. She was watching me differently, studying me. Like she was waiting for me to slip up. Waiting for a crack in my armor. But here's the thing. There weren't any cracks left. I was done. And then, the lease deadline forced the final blow. Our landlord sent over the renewal forms. I left them on the counter, plain as day. When she saw them, she asked, "So, are we renewing?" That was the moment. The big one. I told her no. I had already signed a lease on a one-bedroom closer to my office. Her face crumbled. She asked what that meant for her. I said it meant she had decisions to make: take over the lease on her own or find somewhere else. I even offered to ask the landlord if he'd remove my name from the lease if she wanted to stay. That's when she lost it completely. She yelled that I was abandoning her, that I was cruel, that I was punishing her for being honest. I didn't yell back. I stayed calm. I told her that if she wanted to live here, she had to figure it out like any other adult would. Roommates don't sign leases together unless they talk about it. She never asked me, she just assumed. She accused me of putting her in an impossible situation. I reminded her she used to live on her own before me. She had a steady job then, sure, but the principle was the same. She knew how to handle life, she just didn't want to. She stormed out that night. Didn't come back for hours. When she finally did, she didn't speak to me for 3 full days. But I could hear the phone calls through the walls. Long, tense conversations with her parents. Awkward discussions with friends about possible roommates. On the 4th day, she knocked on my door. Her face was puffy, like she'd been crying. She asked if we could talk, and this time, she didn't try to be coy. She said she realized she had taken me for granted. That she wanted to rebuild. That she wanted us to be a couple again. I asked what changed. 6 weeks ago, she told me she wasn't in love with me. Now suddenly she was? She said she'd been scared of commitment, that she lied to herself, that she realized, seeing me pack up and make plans, that she still loved me, and maybe, if she had said that months earlier, I would have believed her. But now? I asked her, when exactly did you realize you were in love with me again? Was it before or after you realized you couldn't afford this place on your own? She swore it had nothing to do with money. But her timing? It was too convenient. And then, I said something that surprised even me. I told her I wasn't in love with her anymore either. It wasn't entirely true when the words first came out. But the second I said them, I realized it was real. Something inside me clicked into place. I was done. She broke down again. Begged me not to give up so easily. Told me love requires work, compromise. And I told her she was right. But love also requires both people to actually want to be there. And I didn't. That was it. She went to stay with her friend Amanda for a few days after that. I stayed home, packing boxes quietly, making plans for movers, arranging the details of my new life. When you're done, you're done. And for me, that was the moment. 2 weeks later, I moved out. And that was the real ending. Belinda came back to the apartment the day before the movers arrived. She'd been staying at Amanda's, probably expecting that I'd be second-guessing myself. Maybe even sitting there with unpacked boxes, waiting for her to say the right words. But when she walked in, most of my stuff was already packed. Boxes stacked neatly by the wall. Movers scheduled for the morning. She froze in the doorway. "You're really doing this?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. "I'm moving out tomorrow." That's when she pulled the last card she had left. She said she'd been talking with Amanda and Patty. They thought we should try couples counseling before making anything permanent. She said we'd built something good together, something worth saving. I asked her what exactly we had built. She said our routines, our shared friends, the way we worked as a team. And I told her, that sounds like a good roommate situation, Belinda. Not a romantic relationship. She didn't like that answer. She told me I was being stubborn, that she could see I still had feelings for her. She said nobody changes their behavior as drastically as I had unless they're protecting themselves from getting hurt. And maybe once, she'd have been right. But not anymore. I told her the reason my behavior had changed was because my feelings had changed. She asked when exactly I stopped loving her. I thought about it. Really thought. And then I said, probably the night you told your friends you weren't in love with me before you even finished telling me. That was when it clicked for me. That she wasn't really talking to me that night. She was just looking for validation. She had already decided what the outcome would be. She started crying again, said she never meant for things to end this way. I told her I believed her. But intentions don't matter as much as actions. The next morning, the movers came at 8 a.m. She stayed in her bedroom while they loaded up my furniture. I'd already moved most of my clothes and personal stuff to my new place during the week, so the final move was quick. Before I left, I knocked on her door. No answer, just quiet sobbing from inside. I set my key on the counter with a note that had my new address, in case she needed to forward mail or deal with the security deposit. And just like that, I was gone. My new apartment wasn't big, but it felt like freedom. Everything in it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every plant on the balcony, every choice reflected me. Not a compromise we made as a couple. I set up a reading chair by the window where I drank my morning coffee. Bought a few plants for the balcony. Even set up my office the way I always wanted. And here's the part that makes me smile. About 3 weeks later, I started dating someone new. Her name's Rebecca. We met at the hiking group I'd joined. She's a nurse at the hospital downtown. Independent. Grounded. She has her own place, pays her own bills, never once asked me to fix her problems. When she cooks dinner, she cleans up after. When we go out, she pays for her meal unless one of us decides to treat the other. She doesn't just say she loves spending time with me, she shows it by planning things for us to do. And that was when it hit me. This is what a balanced relationship feels like. Belinda, meanwhile, was unraveling. She texted me a week after I moved out, asking if we could grab coffee for closure. She said she wanted to apologize, talk about how things ended. I didn't respond. Because we already had closure. The day I walked out with those movers was the closure. Through mutual friends, I heard she ended up moving back in with her parents. She's still freelancing, but she's also looking for a full-time job now. Patty told me Belinda asks about me sometimes if I'm happy, if I like my new place. But here's the truth. I don't miss her. Not even a little. And that's when I realized sometimes losing someone isn't really a loss. Sometimes, it's a release, because what I gave up wasn't love. It was me doing all the work, carrying all the weight, giving more than I got. And what I gained? My freedom. My balance. My happiness. Belinda wanted the benefits of having a devoted boyfriend without the responsibility of being a devoted girlfriend. And when I finally stopped giving her those benefits, She realized what she'd lost, but by then, I had realized what I was losing: my time, my energy, my peace, and I wasn't about to give those up anymore. You'd think that would have been the end of it. I moved out, started a new chapter, and Belinda went her way. But life has this way of dragging unfinished business back into your orbit, even when you've already closed the book. A couple weeks after I settled into my new place, I got a text. It was Belinda. She said she wanted closure. She wanted to apologize, maybe grab coffee, but to me, closure wasn't something she could give me. I already had it the day I left the key on the counter. So, I didn't reply. And that silence? That was the loudest message I could send. Through mutual friends, I heard more than I cared to know. Belinda had moved back in with her parents. She was still freelancing, but money was tight. She started applying for full-time jobs because reality finally caught up with her. Patty mentioned that Belinda asked about me, whether I liked my new place, whether I was happy, and Patty, bless her, tried to soften the edges by saying Belinda felt like she lost not just her boyfriend, but her best friend. But here's the thing: when someone tells you they're not in love with you, and then tries to keep you around for the perks, they're not your best friend. They're just someone who wants you as a safety net, and I refuse to be anyone's safety net. While Belinda was adjusting to her new reality, mine was thriving. Rebecca and I were spending more time together, and every little thing she did reminded me of the difference between a balanced relationship and the lopsided one I had left behind. When Rebecca cooked dinner, she also cleaned. When we went out, she paid for her share. When she said she cared, she backed it up with action. It wasn't about grand gestures, it was about consistency, about showing up. And I realized, love isn't about convenience. It's not about who makes your life easier, or who you can lean on the hardest. It's about balance, effort, mutual respect. That's what Belinda never understood, and maybe it's what I never demanded until I finally walked away. I think back sometimes to that night on the couch. The one where she muted the TV and told me she wasn't in love with me anymore. And I wonder, what if I had begged her to stay? What if I had tried to fix it? But then I remember how it felt when she told her friends before she even finished telling me. How it felt to see her relief when I agreed to just be her roommate. That wasn't love. That was comfort. And comfort without love is just stagnation. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think Belinda's a terrible person. I think she made selfish choices without fully understanding the weight of them. She wanted to keep the good parts of me while discarding the hard part, loving me. But in the end, both of us had to learn the same lesson. You can't have love without responsibility. You can't have devotion without reciprocity. When I stopped acting like her boyfriend and treated her like just a roommate, the truth revealed itself. She didn't want that life. And neither did I. So no, I don't miss her. I don't wish things had turned out differently. Because sometimes, the best gift someone can give you is letting you see their true colors. And once you've seen them, you can't unsee them. It's funny, friends and even strangers online said maybe I was too harsh, that maybe I should have worked harder to salvage things. But here's my take. Relationships are like investments. You don't keep pouring money into something that keeps losing value. You cut your losses. You learn. You move on. And that's exactly what I did. Belinda lost the safety net she thought would always be there. I gained the freedom to build something real. And between the two of us, I think I got the better end of the deal. You'd think that was the last chapter with Belinda. But sometimes, endings don't happen cleanly. They drag. They echo. And they test your resolve long after you thought you'd walked away for good. Because even after I moved out, Belinda wasn't done trying. About a month into living at my new place, she sent another message. Longer this time. She said she was sorry. Said she had been confused. Said she realized she really did love me and wanted another chance. And for a second, I'll be honest, it tugged at me. 3 years is a long time. We had memories. Inside jokes. Habits. It's hard to shut that part of your brain off completely. But then I remembered the timing. She only realized she loved me again after she couldn't afford the rent, after she saw me packing, after she knew I was serious about leaving. Love isn't supposed to be a survival strategy. It's supposed to be a choice. And her timing made it clear it wasn't about me, it was about what she was losing. So, I didn't reply. Instead, I leaned deeper into my own life. Rebecca and I were becoming closer. I started feeling that spark again, the one you get when someone isn't just saying the right words, but showing them through small actions. She'd plan little day trips, surprise me with coffee after a long shift. And when she said she enjoyed being with me, I knew she meant it. Because she was invested. That contrast made everything with Belinda so much clearer. See, with Belinda, I was the planner, the provider, the engine keeping everything moving. And she was just along for the ride. But with Rebecca, things felt mutual. Balanced. And that balance? That was what I didn't even realize I'd been missing. But Belinda wasn't ready to let go. One night, Patty called me. She said Belinda had been crying, that she missed me, that maybe I should just talk to her one last time, and I told Patty the truth. Belinda already told me she wasn't in love with me. And I believed her. I respected her words. I can't unhear that. And I can't pretend it didn't matter. Patty sighed. She said maybe Belinda had panicked, maybe she didn't mean it. But here's the thing, when someone shows you their hand, you can't just put the cards back in the deck. The trust is gone, the foundation is cracked, and no amount of backtracking will make you forget the feeling of being unwanted. So, I told Patty to let Belinda know I wished her well. But I wasn't going back, and in that moment, I realized I wasn't just closing the door on Belinda. I was closing the door on a version of myself. The version of me that tolerated being taken for granted. The version of me that gave everything and expected nothing. The version of me that confused sacrifice with love. That guy was gone, and honestly, good riddance, because what I gained was worth so much more. My independence, my self-respect, my balance, and, as it turned out, a second chance at something real. By the time I fully settled into my new apartment, something amazing happened. I started to feel like myself again. It's funny, you don't always realize how much weight you've been carrying until you finally set it down. I didn't wake up stressed about whether Belinda paid her share of the bills. I didn't feel like I had to plan every detail of our lives just to keep things moving. I wasn't constantly cleaning up after someone else. My life was mine again. I started to build new routines. Little things that seemed small but made me feel free. Drinking coffee in my reading chair by the window. Taking care of the balcony plants. Cooking meals in my own kitchen, the way I liked them, with no compromises. And you know what? For the first time in a long time, I wasn't lonely. See, loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about being with someone who makes you feel unseen. And that's exactly how I'd felt with Belinda toward the end, unseen, unappreciated. Like I was just the guy who paid the bills. But now, I was rediscovering myself. Rebecca was a big part of that too. She wasn't some fairy tale fix for me. She was a mirror, showing me what it felt like to actually be in a partnership again. We'd cook together, laugh together, even argue sometimes, but it was healthy, balanced. The little things she did meant the most. Like, if she came over and noticed the trash needed to go out, she'd take it without being asked. If I had a long day at work, she'd bring takeout so I didn't have to cook. It wasn't about the acts themselves, it was about the thought behind them. She cared enough to share the weight. That was new for me. And I loved it. Meanwhile, Belinda's reality was catching up with her. I'd hear bits and pieces through mutual friends. Her freelance gigs weren't covering her new expenses. She got hit with bills she'd never had to worry about before: insurance, tickets, car repairs, and her friends. They weren't hanging around as much. Because here's the thing. When you strip away the comfort, the convenience, you find out what's really there. And for Belinda, what was left wasn't enough. And honestly, that wasn't my problem anymore. One night, my buddy Mike asked me if I regretted anything. If maybe I should have just compromised more, tried harder to work things out. I told him no. Because compromise only works when both people are giving. And for the last year of our relationship, I was the only one putting in effort. Relationships aren't supposed to feel like a second job. They're supposed to feel like a team, and once I realized that, there was no going back. It wasn't about punishing Belinda, it was about freeing myself. And maybe, in a way, freeing her too. Because without me carrying her, she had no choice but to finally face her own life. And maybe that was the lesson she needed all along. The weeks kept passing, and the distance between Belinda and me grew wider, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I was moving forward. She was stuck in place, and I didn't realize how obvious that had become until Patty, her friend, reached out again. She told me Belinda was struggling. That she felt lost, like she had ruined everything. Patty asked if I would at least talk to her, maybe hear her out one last time. But here's the truth. Belinda had already had her chance to talk. She'd already told me everything I needed to hear when she said she wasn't in love with me. That was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. And once you hear those words, you don't just erase them. You don't shove them back in the box and pretend they didn't happen. I told Patty as much. I said, "Look, I don't hate Belinda. I don't wish her harm. But I'm not going back. I can't. The trust is gone." Patty sighed. I could hear the disappointment in her voice. But she didn't argue. Maybe deep down, she knew I was right. That night, I sat in my new apartment, drinking coffee by the window, and thought about how far I'd come in such a short time. A year earlier, my whole life had revolved around Belinda, her bills, her car, her friends, her comfort. And now, I was free. The more I thought about it, the more I realized. The hardest part of letting go isn't losing the person. It's losing the version of yourself that thought you needed them. I had convinced myself for so long that taking care of Belinda was love. That being the one to hold everything together was noble. But in reality, I was slowly losing myself in the process, and it took her walking away, or rather, telling me she wasn't in love anymore for me to finally wake up. Funny how that works. Sometimes the words that break you are the same words that save you. Belinda wanted to keep the comfort without the love. She wanted the perks without the responsibility. And once I stopped giving her what she wanted, the whole illusion fell apart. Meanwhile, my relationship with Rebecca was teaching me what real partnership looked like. We were equals. We supported each other. We shared the weight. One night, Rebecca asked me why I never seemed bitter when I talked about Belinda. She said, "Most people would be angry after something like that, but you just seem done." And I told her the truth. Because I'm not angry. Anger means I still care. And I don't. Not anymore. I think that was the moment I realized I had finally healed. Not because I replaced Belinda. Not because I distracted myself with someone new. But because I genuinely didn't feel anything for her anymore. No resentment. No longing. No what-ifs. Just nothing. And sometimes, nothing is the most peaceful feeling in the world. By the time 2 full months had passed since I'd moved out, I felt like my old life with Belinda was a story I'd read once. Not something I'd actually lived. I had my new routines, my new apartment, my new relationship, and everything about it felt lighter, cleaner, more me. But Belinda wasn't done trying to claw her way back in. She texted me again this time, asking if we could meet for coffee. Said she wanted closure, wanted to apologize, wanted to explain herself, and honestly, the audacity almost made me laugh, because closure isn't something someone else hands you. Closure is something you decide for yourself. And I'd already decided. The day I left my key on the counter, that was my closure. So, I didn't reply. Through Patty and mutual friends though, I still heard the updates. Belinda was struggling. She had moved back in with her parents. She was taking on small freelance design gigs, but the money was barely covering her new expenses. For the first time in years, she was carrying her own weight, and it was clearly breaking her down. Her friends said she'd been talking about me a lot. Asking if I was happy. Asking if I missed her. Wondering if maybe she'd made the wrong choice. But here's the thing. It wasn't my responsibility to reassure her. She had made her choice. She had told me she wasn't in love with me. And once those words are out, they can't be taken back. She wanted me as a safety net. She wanted me to keep carrying her while she figured out what she wanted. But I wasn't willing to be plan B in anyone's life, and that was the difference between then and now, because for the longest time, I thought love was sacrifice. I thought being the one who held it all together was proof of my devotion. But now, I knew the truth. Real love isn't about one person carrying the weight, it's about 2 people lifting together. That was what I had with Rebecca. Balance, effort, partnership. And that was what I'd never had with Belinda. One night, I sat down and really thought about it. Why was I so quick to move on? Why didn't I feel the anger or bitterness that so many people expected me to? And the answer was simple. Because by the time Belinda said those words, "I'm not in love with you," I had already been living without her love for months. I just hadn't admitted it to myself. The moment she said it out loud, it was like the curtain finally dropped. I saw the truth for what it was. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. So no, I didn't miss her. I didn't wish things had gone differently. Because the life I had now was proof that walking away was the best decision I ever made. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is let go. But sometimes, letting go is the only thing that saves you, and for me, it did. When I think back on it now, the strangest part isn't that Belinda told me she wasn't in love with me. The strangest part is how she thought she could still keep me around after saying it. Like, imagine telling someone, "I don't love you anymore, but hey, can you still pay my bills, drive me places, and plan my life for me?" That's not love. That's a business arrangement. That's a one-sided contract where one person gives and the other takes. And for a long time, I went along with it. I carried it. I justified it to myself. But when she finally said those words out loud, it freed me. Because I realized that what I was giving wasn't love anymore, it was servitude. And I wasn't about to keep living like that. Of course, Belinda didn't see it that way. She thought she could hit rewind. She thought a few tears, a few "I miss you" lines would undo everything. But the thing is, once trust is broken, once respect is gone, there's no going back. She wanted me as her plan B. And I refused. The more I leaned into my new life, the more obvious the contrast became. With Rebecca, everything felt balanced. Healthy. Real. She had her own apartment. Her own bills. Her own life. And she let me into it not because she needed me, but because she wanted me there. And that's a huge difference. See, Belinda needed me. For everything, and because of that, she never really chose me. Not as a partner, not as an equal. I was just the safety net. Rebecca didn't need me. But she chose me anyway. And that choice, that intentional, everyday choice, meant more than anything. It made me realize that love isn't about dependency. It's about partnership. About building something together, side by side. Belinda never understood that. And maybe she never will. One night, I got another update through Patty. She told me Belinda was having a hard time adjusting. Living with her parents again felt humiliating. She missed the independence she once had, even though she had lost it long before she ever moved in with me. Patty asked me if I'd consider talking to her, just to give her some peace of mind, and I said no, because closure doesn't come from other people, it comes from yourself. Belinda wanted me to give her peace, but I wasn't responsible for her healing. She made her choices. Now she had to live with them. I had already made my peace, and that's when I realized something powerful. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their actions. Because only then do they learn. Only then do they grow. And for me, walking away wasn't just about ending a relationship. It was about reclaiming my time, my energy, and my self-respect. I wasn't her plan B anymore. I was my own plan A. And that made all the difference. It's funny when people hear this story. A lot of them ask me the same question. Do you think Belinda really loved you at all? And honestly, I think she did. At least in the beginning. Back when she was independent. Back when she carried her own weight. Back when we were equals. Yeah, I think there was love there. Real love. But love without effort fades. Love without responsibility rots. And slowly, that's exactly what happened. When she stopped contributing, when she stopped showing gratitude, when she started assuming I would carry everything, that's when the love began to die. Not overnight, but piece by piece. Until one day, she looked at me and realized she didn't feel it anymore. The problem was, by then she had gotten used to the lifestyle. The comfort. The safety net. So instead of leaving completely, she tried to reframe it. Let's just be friends. Let's keep living together. Let's not mess up a good thing. But it wasn't a good thing. It was convenient for her. And suffocating for me. That's what she never seemed to understand. And here's the other part people ask me. Didn't it hurt to walk away? Didn't it hurt to lose 3 years of your life? And the answer is yes. Of course it hurt. I'm not made of stone. Packing boxes, leaving the apartment, saying goodbye to the person I thought I'd build a future with, that wasn't easy. But here's the truth. Staying would have hurt so much more. Because staying meant more years of me giving and her taking. More years of imbalance. More years of slow resentment building up until I didn't even recognize myself anymore. Walking away was painful. But it was clean. It was final. And pain that frees you is always better than comfort that chains you. Rebecca helped me see that too. Not because she saved me, but because being with her showed me what love looks like when it's healthy. It's in the little things, like how she never expects me to carry her weight, but still trusts me enough to lean on me when she needs to. Like how she doesn't just say thank you. She shows it with her time, her effort, her presence. Love, I realized, isn't about grand speeches. It's about small, consistent actions. And once you experience that, you can't go back to pretending anything less is enough. Belinda once told me she wasn't in love with me anymore. And for a while, those words haunted me. But now, I see them for what they really were. The truth. And the truth, no matter how much it hurts, will always set you free. By the time I hit 3 months in my new apartment, Belinda was little more than a shadow in my past. I had routines I loved. I had peace. I had Rebecca. And most importantly, I had myself back. But that didn't stop Belinda from trying one last time. She showed up at my place. No warning, no text. Just knocked on the door like nothing had happened. When I opened it, she looked different. Tired. Worn down. Not the confident, independent woman I had once met, but someone who had been dragged through her own choices. She asked if we could talk. Said she'd been thinking about everything. That she knew she took me for granted. That she wanted another chance. And I just stood there, listening, realizing how different we were now. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even tempted. I was just done. She said she wanted to rebuild. That she'd learned her lesson. That she finally understood what I had been doing for her all those years. But here's the thing, apologies don't erase reality. Lessons learned too late don't rebuild broken trust. I told her calmly. You once told me you weren't in love with me anymore. And I believed you. That was the truth. And even if you've changed your mind now, I can't unhear those words. I can't unlive the months I spent carrying everything alone, she cried. She said she was scared. That she made a mistake. That she was willing to prove herself. But love isn't a negotiation. It's not a contract you can re-sign once you realize you can't afford to lose the benefits. I told her the truth. I don't love you anymore either. And even if I did, I wouldn't go back. Because I deserve more than being someone's plan B. Her face crumpled. She begged me not to give up on us. Said we had history, memories, a bond worth saving. But history isn't enough. Memories aren't enough. If someone isn't willing to choose you when it matters, then their bond is just convenience in disguise. So, I told her I wished her well, that I hoped she figured things out, but we were over, and with that, I closed the door. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cinematic. It was just final. For the first time in years, I felt like I had complete control of my life. Not because I had someone new, not because I won the breakup, but because I refused to settle for less than I deserved. Belinda lost me the moment she told me she wasn't in love with me. And I found myself the moment I believed her. And that, in the end, was all the closure I needed. After that final conversation at my door, I never saw Belinda again. And honestly, that was the best thing for both of us. I heard bits and pieces through mutual friends. She was still freelancing, still struggling, still trying to find her footing. Eventually, she moved back in with her parents full-time. Some people said she felt embarrassed. Others said she felt like she'd lost not just her boyfriend, but her best friend. But here's the truth. She didn't lose a best friend. She lost someone she leaned on without giving back. She lost her safety net. And me? I didn't lose anything at all, because what I gave up wasn't love, it was obligation disguised as love. What I gave up was the constant weight of carrying someone who wasn't willing to walk beside me. What I gained was everything: my mornings in my own apartment, my routines, my freedom, my peace, my self-respect. And yes, Rebecca was different. From the start, she showed me what real partnership looked like. Not grand gestures, not over-the-top romance, but balance, consistency, effort. When she cooked, she cleaned too. When she said she cared, she proved it by planning something special. When we split the bill, she insisted on paying her part, unless one of us agreed otherwise. She wasn't just with me because it was convenient, she was with me because she wanted to be. And that's the difference I hadn't realized I'd been missing all along. Love isn't about who needs you. It's about who chooses you. Every single day. Belinda never chose me. She chose the comfort I provided, the lifestyle I gave her, the safety net I represented. And once that net was gone, she panicked. She tried to crawl back, not because she rediscovered her love, but because she discovered how hard it was to stand on her own. But by then, it was too late. Because the truth is, love can't survive on panic. It can't survive on convenience. It can't survive on one person carrying the weight. It only survives when both people decide every single day that they're in it together. That's what I learned the hard way. And it's what I'll never forget. So no, I don't miss Belinda. I don't wish things had turned out differently. If anything, I'm grateful. Grateful that she told me the truth. Grateful that I believed her. Grateful that I finally saw what I had been ignoring for so long. Because sometimes, the words that break your heart are the same words that set you free. And for me, "I'm not in love with you anymore" was exactly that. Looking back now, I think the biggest shift wasn't just leaving Belinda. It was what leaving her taught me about myself. For years, I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought it meant doing everything in my power to make the other person comfortable, even if it left me drained. I thought carrying the weight was proof of devotion. But here's what I learned. Real love isn't one person carrying the load. It's both people walking forward, side by side, each carrying their share. With Belinda, I was carrying both of us. And when she told me she wasn't in love with me anymore, it stung. Sure, but it also revealed the truth I had been ignoring. She hadn't been carrying her side of the weight for a long time. And the second I stopped carrying hers too, everything fell apart. That wasn't love. That was dependency. That was convenience. And once I saw it for what it was, I couldn't unsee it. Rebecca reminded me of that every day without even trying. She showed me that love isn't about grand declarations or dramatic apologies. It's about showing up in small, consistent ways. It's about choosing each other. Not because you have to, but because you want to. She never asked me to fix her problems. She never expected me to clean up her messes. She came into my life as a whole person. And together, we built something balanced. And for the first time in years, I understood what partnership actually felt like. It wasn't about me pouring everything into someone else, and hoping they'd eventually give back. It was about both of us, pouring equally, consistently, and building something stronger together. That's why when people ask if I regret my time with Belinda, I say no. Because she taught me exactly what I won't accept again. She taught me that love without effort is just comfort. That, "I'm not in love with you anymore," isn't something to fight against, it's something to listen to. She taught me that when someone shows you who they are, you believe them. And most of all, she taught me that my love, my time, my effort, they're worth more than being someone's safety net. So, do I wish things had ended differently? Not at all. Because if they hadn't ended exactly the way they did, I might still be stuck in that apartment, carrying all the weight, confusing obligation with love. Instead, I walked away. And walking away was the best decision I ever made. So here's how it all ended. Belinda moved back in with her parents. She picked up more freelance projects, even started applying for full-time jobs. From what I've heard through Patty and a few others, she still talks about me sometimes, still wonders if I'm happy. And the answer is simple. Yes, I am. Because for the first time in a long time, my life feels balanced. My apartment is small but perfect. My mornings are quiet and peaceful, coffee in my reading chair, sunlight coming through the window, plants on the balcony. My work is steady, my energy is mine, and my time is my own. And then, there's Rebecca. She's not a fairy tale ending. She's not some perfect savior. She's just real, independent, caring, balanced. She doesn't need me, but she chooses me. And I choose her. And that, I've learned, is what love is supposed to be. Not dependency, not obligation, not one person carrying the other, but two people showing up for each other, consistently, because they want to. Belinda once told me she wasn't in love with me anymore. And for a while, I thought those words were the worst thing she could have ever said. But now, I see them differently. Because that was the moment I stopped settling. That was the moment I stopped confusing sacrifice with love. That was the moment I started reclaiming myself. And in the end, that's the greatest gift she ever gave me, the truth. So, if you're listening to this and you've ever been where I was, carrying all the weight, giving all the effort, convincing yourself that's what love is, I hope my story reminds you of something important. You deserve balance. You deserve reciprocity. You deserve someone who doesn't just take, but gives. Someone who doesn't just need you, but chooses you. Don't be afraid to let go when someone shows you they can't give you that. Because sometimes the hardest words to hear, "I'm not in love with you anymore," are also the words that set you free. And freedom, I've learned, is worth everything. Family dynamics shifting. At the next family gathering, I noticed the difference. My sister wasn't sulking or making side comments anymore. She was talking about her job, her goals, even a new project she was excited about. The rest of the family picked up on it too. Mom looked relieved. Dad smiled more. Grandma, as always, stayed quiet. But her eyes sparkled with that knowing pride she carried whenever she saw growth in her grandchildren. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, unspoken history lingering between us. But the energy was lighter. Reflection on growth. Here's the thing about family drama. It never completely disappears. It leaves scars, memories, things you don't forget. But scars don't have to define you. They can remind you of battles survived, lessons learned, and the strength you never knew you had. My sister's growth wasn't just hers, it was mine too. Because learning to say no taught me how to value my own peace. And learning to separate financial enabling from emotional support taught me how to love in a healthier way. Grandma's final reminder. One afternoon, I was sitting with Grandma on her porch when she said something I'll never forget. "You know, families aren't meant to be perfect," she said, sipping her tea. "They're meant to teach us. Sometimes the lessons are painful. But those lessons make us who we are." I nodded, letting her words sink in. "And you," she added, "have learned one of the hardest lessons of all. That love isn't about giving everything. It's about giving wisely." That sentence has echoed in my mind ever since. Closing thoughts for this chapter. By now, my story with my sister had shifted from battles over money to lessons about boundaries, growth, and what it really means to be family. We weren't the picture-perfect siblings Mom dreamed of. But we were learning. And maybe, in the end, that was enough. Because sometimes the best stories don't end with everyone holding hands around the dinner table. Sometimes they end with quiet respect, a fragile truce, and the hope that tomorrow will be a little better than yesterday. As the months rolled on, I started noticing something I hadn't seen in years. My sister was calmer. Not perfect. Not magically transformed into a saint. But calmer. The drama that once dominated every family gathering was fading into the background. She wasn't making digs at me anymore. Wasn't trying to embarrass me in front of relatives. Wasn't flooding my phone with demands. And in that quiet, I started to reflect on just how far we'd come. The weight that lifted. When you carry someone else's problems for too long, you don't realize how heavy they've become until you finally put them down. For years, I thought stress and guilt were just part of being a good brother. That family loyalty meant sacrificing peace, savings, even dignity. But the truth is, once I stepped back and held my boundaries, I realized just how much lighter life could be. I had more energy, more focus, more room for things that actually mattered: my own career, my friendships, even simple joys like going for a run without feeling like my phone might explode with drama at any second. The shift in conversations. Our conversations changed too. Instead of revolving around bills, debt, or what I owed her, they became human. She'd call to talk about her job. About the coworker who drove her crazy. Or the project she was proud of finishing. She'd send me pictures of her cats curled up in the sun. Or memes that made her laugh. It wasn't deep bonding, but it was normal. And after everything we'd been through, normal felt like a gift. Mom's relief. Mom noticed too. One evening she called me and said, "I don't know what happened, but I'm just so grateful you two aren't at each other's throats anymore." I smiled. Boundaries happened, Mom. That's what changed. She didn't fully understand. She still believed family should mean unlimited sacrifice. But she couldn't deny the results. Peace in the family. A calmer daughter. A son who wasn't constantly on edge, and in her own way, that was enough for her. Dad's quiet words. Dad, who rarely spoke up in all the chaos, surprised me one afternoon. We were standing outside after mowing Grandma's lawn when he said, "You did the right thing. You know, with your sister. If you hadn't stood your ground, she'd have dragged you under with her." It was the closest thing to validation I'd ever gotten from him on the subject. And it meant more than I could say. Grandma's wisdom one more time. And of course, there was Grandma. I sat with her one late summer evening, watching the sun dip behind the trees. She sipped her tea, then said, "You know what I admire most about you? You didn't let bitterness take root. You set your boundaries, but you didn't harden your heart." I hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. I hadn't stopped loving my sister. I hadn't cut her off completely, or wished her harm. I'd just stopped letting her mistakes become my responsibility, and in doing so, I'd kept my compassion intact without losing myself. Reflection. By now, I realized something important. Family doesn't mean endless giving. It doesn't mean becoming a martyr. It means caring in ways that are healthy, sustainable, and honest. For years, my sister thought love equaled money. That being a good brother meant paying her bills. But now, slowly, she was learning that love could mean encouragement, advice, or simply showing up without drama. And I was learning too. Learning that saying no doesn't make you cruel, it makes you capable of loving in a healthier way. Closing thoughts. By the time this chapter of our story wound down, I knew one thing for certain. Peace wasn't about fixing everything. It wasn't about magically erasing years of conflict. It was about creating space where growth could happen. And maybe, just maybe, that was what we both needed all along. By the time another year rolled around, it almost felt like the storm between my sister and me had been a bad dream. The shouting matches, the Facebook rants, the endless guilt trips, they were all fading into the rearview mirror. But here's the funny thing about healing. It doesn't come all at once. It comes in layers. And sometimes, just when you think everything's finally calm, life tosses one more test in your path. A new crisis on the horizon. It happened in the spring. My sister called me one evening, her voice trembling not with anger this time, but with something else. Fear. "There's been cutbacks at work," she said. "They're letting people go. I don't know if my job is safe." Instantly, my chest tightened. We'd been here before. Job loss had been the spark that ignited years of chaos between us. I braced myself, waiting for the inevitable. The ask, but to my surprise, it didn't come. Instead, she said, "I don't want to panic. I needed to tell someone, that was it. No demands, no guilt trips, just honesty." The difference this time, in the past, a crisis meant she'd turn to me like I was her personal safety net. This time, she simply wanted support. And that small difference meant everything. I told her, "Whatever happens, you'll figure it out. You've been doing better, and I know you can handle this." There was a pause, and then she whispered, "Thanks. That means more than you know." It was such a shift from the sister who once waved overdue bills in my face, who once declared me dead to her for refusing to pay her mortgage. And in that moment, I realized just how much she had grown. Family observations. At the next family dinner, I noticed the change too. My sister wasn't sulking or hinting about money anymore. Instead, she talked about updating her resume, networking, and saving more aggressively, just in case. Even Mom seemed stunned. She shot me a glance across the table, her eyes wide with quiet relief, as if to say, "Is this really happening?" And Grandma, ever the observer, simply nodded approvingly. Reflection on resilience. Here's the thing about struggle. It either breaks you, or it makes you stronger. For years, I worried my sister would never learn, that she'd always expect someone else to save her. But slowly, through setbacks and boundaries, she was discovering resilience, and in a way, I was too. Because holding the line against her demands hadn't just taught her lessons, it had taught me resilience as well. Resilience in the face of guilt, criticism, and pressure. Resilience to trust my own instincts even when the whole family seemed to side against me. A conversation with Grandma. Later that week, I visited Grandma again. Sitting on her porch, the spring breeze warm against our skin, she said, "I've seen her change. She still has a long way to go, But she's different now. I nodded. She really is. And honestly, I never thought we'd get here. Grandma smiled. That's the thing about life. People surprise us. Sometimes for worse, sometimes for better. But they surprise us. I let her words sink in. Because she was right. My sister had been the source of so much pain, but now, slowly, she was becoming a source of hope. Closing thoughts. As I look back on everything, the fights, the betrayals, the guilt trips, the moments of silence, and now the fragile steps toward growth, I realize this story isn't about villains and heroes. It's about people. Flawed, messy, complicated people trying to figure out how to love each other without losing themselves in the process. And maybe, just maybe, that's what family really is. Not perfect harmony, but the constant, sometimes painful, process of learning where love ends and responsibility begins. Spring turned into summer, and with it came a new kind of rhythm in our family. For the first time in years, gatherings didn't feel like battlefields. My sister wasn't picking fights, I wasn't walking on eggshells, and the tension that once hovered like a storm cloud over every dinner had begun to lift. But healing, as I'd learned, isn't a straight line. It's more like a winding road, full of detours and speed bumps. And just when you think you're cruising smoothly, life throws another test in your path: the promotion. By midsummer, my sister's fears about layoffs had turned into something completely different. Opportunity. She called one night, her voice buzzing with excitement. "You won't believe this," she said. "They're offering me the promotion. Bigger salary. Benefits. A real shot at moving up." I could hear the joy. But underneath it, I also heard hesitation. "But," she continued, "it's a lot. More hours, more pressure. And honestly, I'm scared I'll mess it up." This time, she wasn't asking for money. She wasn't even asking for me to fix anything. She was just asking for reassurance. So I told her the truth. Every big step feels scary at first. But you've come this far. Don't sell yourself short now. There was a pause, and then she said quietly, "Thanks. I needed to hear that. We have to act discreet in the deck. From Morse 2 and 2000 by on the deck." For once, my role wasn't the family bank. It was the brother she could lean on for words, not dollars. And it felt good. The shift in our dynamic. That conversation marked a turning point. Our dynamic was different now. Less about battles, more about cautious trust. She'd still vent about bills or stress, but the tone had shifted. She wasn't laying them at my feet anymore. She was simply sharing, the way siblings are supposed to. And in return, I found myself listening more, encouraging her where I could, but always mindful of my boundaries. I wasn't responsible for saving her, but I could still care. Family dinner, revisited. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around again, the atmosphere was almost unrecognizable from the year before. We sat around the table, and instead of accusations or guilt trips, my sister proudly talked about projects at work. About how she'd managed to pay off one of her smaller debts, about her plans to finally start a savings account. The pride in Mom's eyes was unmistakable. Dad smiled quietly, nodding along. And Grandma, who had watched every storm from her quiet corner, gave the faintest of approving smiles. It wasn't perfect. The scars were still there, but the storm had passed. And in its place was something that almost looked like growth, reflection. The lesson of boundaries. Looking at her across the table that night, I realized something profound. If I'd given in to her demands, if I'd paid her mortgage and drained myself to keep her afloat, she never would have learned. She never would have grown. Boundaries hadn't destroyed our relationship. They'd saved it. Because saying no isn't cruelty. Sometimes, it's the most loving choice you can make. Closing thoughts. By now, I wasn't just surviving the chaos of family drama, I was learning from it. I was learning that love without limits turns into resentment. That peace requires strength. And that sometimes, the best gift you can give someone is the chance to stand on their own 2 feet. And as I looked around that Thanksgiving table, hearing laughter instead of arguments, I knew one thing for certain. The storm had changed us both. And maybe, just maybe, it had changed us for the better. When I look back on this journey with my sister, it almost feels like 2 completely different lifetimes. The first one was chaos arguments at family dinners, guilt-tripping phone calls, late-night texts demanding money, Facebook posts painting me as the villain. The second one was calmer. Still imperfect, but calmer. And in that calm, I found something I never thought I would. Perspective. The long road here. It had been years since that first night when she looked me in the eye and declared that I should pay her mortgage. Years since the public showdowns, the slammed doors, the whispered campaigns at family gatherings, and yet, those memories still echoed. I could still picture Grandma's steady eyes silently urging me to hold my ground. I could still feel the sting of my sister telling me I was dead to her. I could still hear Mom's sighs, begging me to help just for now. Those moments left scars. But scars, I've learned, don't mean weakness. They mean survival. Where we stand now, today, my sister and I aren't what you'd call close. We don't share every detail of our lives. We don't confide in each other the way some siblings do. But we coexist peacefully. We exchange holiday gifts. We laugh sometimes at family dinners. We share the occasional inside joke, the kind that only siblings can really understand. And sometimes, that's enough. Because relationships don't always have to be rebuilt to what they once were. Sometimes it's enough to build something new, something different, on the ashes of what burned before. The role of boundaries. If there's one thing this whole saga taught me, it's that boundaries aren't selfish, they're essential. Boundaries saved me from financial ruin. Boundaries saved me from resentment. Boundaries saved me from losing myself in someone else's choices. And oddly enough, boundaries saved my relationship with my sister too, because if I had caved, if I had drained myself to keep her afloat, I would have grown to hate her. And hate, once it takes root, is harder to uproot than any debt. By saying no, I gave both of us a chance to grow. Grandma's legacy. Grandma's role in all this can't be overstated. Her quiet wisdom, her steady reminders, her refusal to enable my sister's behavior, all of it gave me strength when I was drowning in doubt. Even now, I can still hear her voice. Don't let her shame take root in you. Stand firm. The future will remember who held their dignity. She was right. And her words became a compass, not just for my relationship with my sister, but for how I handle boundaries in every part of my life. The final lesson. Here's what I've learned. Family is complicated. It's messy. It's painful. It's beautiful. And it's frustrating all at once. But family is also where some of life's hardest lessons are taught. My sister taught me that love without boundaries becomes exploitation. My parents taught me that peace sometimes requires disappointment. And my grandmother taught me that dignity matters more than approval. In the end, I didn't lose my sister. I didn't win against her either. What I gained was something far more valuable. Clarity. Closing thoughts. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. You are not responsible for fixing someone else's mistakes. You are not selfish for protecting your peace. And you are not cruel for saying no. Because sometimes, saying no is the only way to say yes to yourself, to your future, and to the possibility that those you love might finally learn to stand on their own. And if that lesson comes through storms, arguments, and years of pain, so be it. Because in the end, the calm that follows is worth every battle. And for years, I had been expected to be the umbrella. But now, for the first time, it seemed like she was learning to carry her own load. That didn't erase the past. But it did change the way I looked at the future. Grandma's words. One afternoon, I visited Grandma again. We sat on her porch, sipping tea like we always did. She looked at me, her eyes soft but sharp. "Anthony," she said, "you've given your sister the greatest gift without realizing it." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You let her fail," Grandma said simply. "You let her face the consequences. Everyone else tried to cushion her. You didn't. And that's what finally made her grow. Thank you for watching the Now or So Me. From Sittard Not the Round the Watching the Choir to Cower to Catter." Her words sank deep. Because for so long, I had felt guilty about saying no. Guilty about walking away. But maybe that guilt had been misplaced all along. The shift. The next time I saw Melissa, she carried herself differently. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't suddenly glow with success. But there was a quiet steadiness about her I hadn't seen before. She talked about work schedules, about saving money, about paying my parents' rent. For once, her words weren't filled with excuses. They were filled with plans. And though part of me still kept my guard up, another part started to believe maybe, just maybe, she was finally changing. My parents too were different. They still slipped into old habits, sometimes small comments about how family should stick together. Little reminders of how things used to be. But they didn't push the way they used to. They didn't guilt trip me. They didn't demand. I think losing the cabin had been a wake-up call. A reminder that enabling Melissa had real consequences, not just for her, but for everyone. And maybe, just maybe, they had finally learned. Sarah. Meanwhile, my friendship with Sarah deepened. We weren't rushing into anything, but there was a comfort between us that I hadn't felt in years. She reminded me what it was like to have someone in my corner, someone who didn't want anything from me except honesty. One evening, over dinner, she said something that stuck with me. "You know, Anthony, you've been carrying this story for so long. Maybe it's time to start writing a new one." She was right. For too long, my life had been defined by family drama, by Melissa's demands, by my parents' expectations, but I didn't want that to be my whole story. A new vision. I started thinking about the future differently, not in terms of what I was running from, but what I was building toward. Maybe one day, that would mean a family of my own. Maybe it would mean new adventures, new places, new challenges, but whatever it meant, it would be on my terms. With boundaries, with respect, with peace. And that realization felt like freedom. Reflection. Looking back, I realized something I hadn't before. This whole saga wasn't just about Melissa's mortgage, or the cabin, or the endless fights. It was about identity. About reclaiming who I was outside of the role my family had cast me in. For years, I had been the responsible one. The fixer. The safety net. But now, I was just Anthony. And that was enough. Closing thoughts. If you've ever been where I was, if you've felt crushed by the weight of family expectations, if you've been told that saying no makes you selfish, hear this. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. Doors that let in peace, self-respect, and freedom. And sometimes, those doors don't just protect you. They give others the chance to finally grow. That's what I learned. And that's the story I carry now. By this point, my life felt like it had shifted onto a completely new track. The drama with Melissa, the constant guilt tripping from my parents, the endless battles over money, all of it had defined my 20s and early 30s. But now, in this new chapter, I was finally learning to breathe again. It didn't mean the past was erased. The scars were still there. But instead of weighing me down, they had become reminders of what I would never allow again. Building forward, I poured myself into the new life I was creating. Work was fulfilling. I had started mentoring a few younger employees at the office, teaching them the lessons I wished someone had taught me earlier. How to set boundaries, how to advocate for themselves, how to recognize when they were being taken advantage of. Outside of work, I found joy in the small things. Morning runs, weekend hikes, photography projects that challenged me to see the world differently. And slowly, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was actually living. Melissa's progress. Updates about Melissa trickled in, usually through grandma, or, occasionally, my mom. She was still working at the library. She had started saving money. She was talking about maybe moving into a small apartment of her own within the year. It wasn't dramatic progress. It wasn't flashy. But it was real. And for once I didn't feel resentment hearing it. I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Instead, I felt proud. Not because I had fixed her, far from it. But because she was finally doing what she should have been doing, all along. Standing on her own. My parents' shift. My parents were different too. They were still themselves, still quick with unsolicited advice, still prone to reminiscing about the good old days. But something had shifted. They no longer treated me like a bottomless well of resources. They no longer expected me to solve Melissa's problems. Instead, when we talked, they asked about me. About my work, my city, my life. It felt strange. Almost foreign. But it was also healing, because for the first time, they were seeing me not as the fixer, but as their son. Sarah's presence. And then there was Sarah. What started as casual reconnection had grown into something deeper. She became a steady presence in my life. Supportive, kind, and grounding in a way I hadn't realized I needed. One evening, we were walking through the park when she said, "You know, Anthony, your story isn't just about what you went through. It's about what you chose afterward. You could have stayed bitter, stayed trapped, but you didn't. You built something new." Her words stuck with me. Because she was right. The past had shaped me, but it didn't define me. Grandma's health. As the months went on, Grandma's health continued to decline. Each visit felt more precious, each conversation more meaningful. She didn't have the energy she used to, but her wisdom never faded. One afternoon, as we sat together in the quiet of her living room, she said, "Anthony, promise me something." "Anything," I replied. "Promise me you'll keep choosing peace, even when it's hard, because that's the only thing that lasts." I squeezed her hand and promised. And I meant it. Reflection. Looking back, I realized how far things had come. From the phone call where Melissa demanded I pay her mortgage, to the bitter fights over the cabin, to the family dinners that felt like battlefields. Those moments had nearly broken me. But they had also remade me. They taught me to stand up for myself. They taught me to value peace over appearances. And they taught me that love doesn't mean sacrifice without limits. Closing thoughts. If you've made it this far, maybe you've carried the same kind of weight I did. Maybe you've been the one who held everything together while no one held you. Maybe you've been told that family means giving until there's nothing left of you. But here's what I've learned. Family can be love. But love without respect is just control. Boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary. And choosing peace, even when it costs you something, is never the wrong choice. Because at the end of the day, peace isn't just freedom from chaos. It's the foundation for everything good that comes after. And for me, that's the life I'm finally living. The funny thing about peace is that once you taste it, you start to realize how little you ever had it before. In the past, my life was measured in crises. Melissa's latest demand, my parents' guilt trips, the looming threat of losing the cabin. It was constant noise. Constant tension. Now, the quiet felt almost strange, but in the best way. Life in balance. In my city, I had finally settled into routines that weren't about survival, but about joy. Mornings started with runs by the river. Evenings often ended with photography projects or quiet dinners with Sarah. Work was fulfilling, not draining, and I no longer felt like I was carrying a second unpaid full-time job just managing my family's chaos. It felt like life had shifted from black and white to full color. Melissa's continued growth. Updates about Melissa kept coming, usually through grandma or my mom. She had not only kept her library job but had been promoted to a supervisory role. She was paying rent, keeping up with bills, and even starting to save. It wasn't the dramatic success story some people might imagine, but for Melissa, it was huge. And the most surprising part? She wasn't blaming me anymore. I didn't get passive-aggressive texts. I didn't get cryptic Facebook posts. Just silence and, in its own way, respect. Parents easing up. My parents were slowly changing too. They no longer pressured me with guilt trips about stepping up for family. Instead, our conversations were about everyday life. What I was cooking, how work was going. My mom even asked about my photography, genuinely curious rather than dismissive. It wasn't perfect. They still had moments where old habits slipped through, but overall, it felt like the weight between us had lightened. A moment with Grandma. Grandma's health was declining, but her clarity was still sharp. One evening, I visited her and told her about Melissa's progress. She smiled, her hands resting on mine. See, Anthony? Sometimes the hardest no brings the strongest growth. You carried enough for long enough. Now you get to watch her learn to carry herself. Her words filled me with a quiet pride. Because for so long, I had doubted myself. Wondered if saying no had been selfish. Wondered if I had done the wrong thing. But now, it was clear. That no had been the most loving thing I could have done for her, for my parents, and for myself. Sarah's role. Through all of this, Sarah became an anchor. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, she said, "Anthony, do you realize you've built a whole new life? One that's not about what you had to escape, but what you've chosen to create?" Her words stopped me. Because she was right. I wasn't just running from the past anymore. I was building toward a future. A future defined not by obligation, but by choice. Reflection. As I think about it now, I see the arc so clearly. It started with Melissa's demand that I pay her mortgage. It spiraled into chaos, threats, family battles, the loss of the cabin. For years, it felt like I was drowning. But in the end, all of it forced me to learn the lesson I'd been avoiding. That peace isn't given to you by others. You claim it for yourself. And when you do, everything changes. Closing thoughts. If you've ever carried the kind of weight I did, I want to remind you, you're allowed to say no. You're allowed to build a life that's yours. And you're allowed to choose peace, even when others call it selfish. Because, at the end of the day, the people who love you will learn to respect your boundaries. And the people who don't? They were never respecting you to begin with. That's the lesson I carry now. By now, the storm had long passed. Melissa had her own job. My parents had eased up. And Grandma's wisdom had become the compass I carried into every decision. I had reclaimed my peace. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for the next disaster. But endings aren't really endings. They're transitions. And this final part of the story isn't about loss, it's about what came after. Grandma's last lesson. Not long after Melissa started steady work, Grandma's health declined quickly. I was by her side as much as I could be. We talked about everything: life, choices, regrets, and love. One afternoon, she looked at me and said, "Anthony, you're proof that strength isn't about carrying the most weight. It's about knowing when to set it down." Those words were her final gift to me. When she passed, the family gathered. For once, there were no fights, no accusations, no drama. Just grief, and the quiet acknowledgement that she had been the glue holding us together. And as I stood there, I realized something. The lesson she had taught me wasn't just for my family. It was for my life. Melissa at the funeral. At the funeral, Melissa approached me. Her eyes were red, her voice soft. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "Not for money, not for saving me, but for finally making me face myself." I nodded. "You don't have to thank me. Just keep going. That's thanks enough." For the first time, I believed she would. The cabin's shadow. After Grandma's passing, talk of the cabin surfaced again. Not in anger this time, but in memories. People shared stories, fishing trips, birthdays, summer nights under the stars. The pain of losing it was still there, but somehow lighter. Because I realized, the cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was the moments inside it. And those moments lived on. Even if the property didn't. A new chapter. Back in my city, I started focusing more on my future. Sarah and I grew closer. We didn't rush, but there was something solid between us. She was steady, kind, and real. With her, I didn't feel like the fixer. I didn't feel like the one holding the world up. I just felt like myself, and for the first time, I started imagining what it would be like to build something new with her. Or with someone. On my own terms. Reflection. Looking back on the entire journey, I see it clearly now. It began with a demand that I pay Melissa's mortgage. It spiraled into fights, threats, guilt, and the loss of the cabin. At the time, it felt like my world was falling apart, but in truth, it was falling into place, because those battles forced me to learn what I had avoided for years. That family love without respect is just control. And peace is something you choose, not something you beg for. Closing thoughts. So here's the final takeaway. You are not selfish for saying no. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. And you are not alone in choosing yourself. Even when the people closest to you don't understand. Sometimes the hardest no is the one that saves you. And sometimes, it's the one that gives the people around you the chance to grow. 2. Melissa didn't need me to pay her mortgage. She needed me to stop paying it. My parents didn't need me to fix everything. They needed me to let them face the consequences. And I didn't need their approval. I needed my peace. And now, I have it.